Hey everybody, I'm Louise Gittleman. I'm the award-winning New York Times best-selling author of Before the Change, and I'm so happy to be with you again because Before the Change has been updated and revised, and it's now out for pre-order and ordering. So my questions to you today, because we're talking about sugar, are let's take the perimenopause quiz, which is part of the perimenopause book. So, first question, do you feel depressed or have the blues for no reason? Because if you do, sugar could be one of those reasons. Do you experience restlessness, irritability, and or anxiety? Because if you do, your sugar intake could be the culprit. I think you're getting the message. Number 3, have your sleep patterns changed with frequent awakenings or insomnia? Does your heart sometimes pound while you're resting or sitting? Do you have food cravings? Do you have bloating or fluid retention? Do you visit the bathroom more frequently? Has your sex drive diminished? Do you have other headaches or migraines? And are you starting to put weight around the middle? Well, if you are, we've got to look at what your sugar intake is. Because what we know is if you take too much sugar in any form, whether it's processed sugar or even natural sugar, your blood sugar can go up and down, and it can trigger the production of a hormone known as insulin. And insulin wreaks a lot of havoc on the system. Number 1, it's the big fat-promoting hormone. When I did my work, and I was on his radio show all through the 1990s, Dr. Atkins talked about insulin as being one of the most weight-promoting hormones we have in addition to cortisol. And insulin is what we want to keep low. How do we do that? With the right kind of fats and the right kind of proteins. And all that information, as well as diet information for perimenopause, is in Before the Change. So what I'd like to discuss with you now is why sugar is so bad. And the reason it's so bad is that there's so much of it. It's hidden in everything. I was just looking at one of my clients' diet histories. He had just come back with a very high triglyceride level, and his blood sugar had risen disastrously over the past year. And I said to him, what are you eating? Did a diet history, and then I went to his house and I checked his refrigerator. Well, what I found was lots of hidden sources of simple sugar. And where was that sugar hiding? It wasn't in the ketchup, although there is hidden sugar in ketchup. It wasn't in the salad dressings. It was in his yogurt. His fruit-sweetened yogurt had about 16, or must have been 16 or 18 grams of sugar. We reduced his sugar-imbued yogurt, fruit-imbued yogurt, with just plain yogurt, and within the next 3 weeks after he took his next blood sugar test, blood sugar went down to normal and his triglycerides were at least 120. They had been 220. So what I can say is that sugar hides in many, many different places. Anything that ends with OSE means that you may have sugar and too much of a sugar overload. So on that note, I'd like to also let you know that Before the Change is dropping. It's launching on September 5th. Labor Day, I believe, that's Labor Day this year. And I'd love you to just buy a copy of the book, go on my FatFlush Nation, join the group, and we'll answer all of your hormone questions for Before the Change. I have my trusty assistant with me who's off camera. She'll be asking me questions. I'll answer as best as I can. So Allie, it's your turn.
All right, well, first of all, Cindy Davis commented that giving up sugar was the best thing she ever did, which I'm sure you agree with.
Well, Cindy Davis, what I can tell you is that I'm the daughter of a type 2 diabetic. So I've been conscious of sugar and the hidden sources of sugar in the diet for at least, dare I say, 40 years at this point. I have a great-grandmother that died of complications of diabetes. I have an uncle, I have two uncles and first cousins that had type 2 diabetes in their elder years, and I can tell you that all of this is so important in terms of learning where the sugar is hidden and how to modify sugar metabolism. So the important thing to realize is this: if you have the right kind of fats and the right kind of proteins at your meals, you won't feel the need to eat sugar because your blood sugar will be stable. So that's the key to the Before the Change diet. It's kind of the peri diet that I write about. The right kind of fats we've spoken about. Your avocados, your nuts, your nut seeds, your omega-3s, your omega-6s. maybe a little bit of pine nut oil, which is so good for your digestion. But it's really important that you understand that fat is the perfect fuel for your system, your blood sugar, and your brain. And then comes your protein to kind of level things off. So sugar and giving it up is the best thing that any of you can do because it affects your immunity, it affects your heart, it affects your skin, it affects your beauty, your aging process. And a little bit is good, a lot is where the problem is. So we're eating something like 130 to 150 pounds per person of pounds per person per year of sugar. And a lot of that used to be coming from high fructose corn syrup. Thank God most of us understand that high fructose corn syrup is not the innocent bystander that we used to think. If you've got too much high sugar fructose in your diet, then you've got a problem with high LDLs, a problem perhaps with non-alcoholic fatty liver syndrome, which is becoming a real concern even with those of us that are thin, and you're raising your uric acid. So you've got to get rid of sugars. You have to do a real inventory, take a diet history, join us on the Fat Flush Nation, even for Before the Change questions, and we'll help you moderate your diet, moderate your life, and change your DNA destiny.
The first question is, what causes sugar cravings?
Well, what causes sugar cravings is the blood sugar that's going too low. So what you have to do is make sure that at the beginning of the day, at least 1 hour after you get up, unless you're doing intermittent fasting, and I understand that, you've got to have something in your tummy. I would like people to have a smoothie, and this is my vanilla A2 milk whey smoothie, which will give you the right kind of proteins, the right kind of fats, and the right kind of sugar in the form of berries, a little low sugar carbohydrate there, with high fiber. So that's the type of thing you should do at least an hour after you get up. Now, if you're not taking something like that in the morning, then some other protein source, maybe some avocado on some non-gluten whole grain toast, or even some peanut butter, organic of course, or almond butter. But I really feel that too many people think that just because fruit is natural, that they're overeating too much fruit, and that can really make your blood sugar go crazy. Best fruits are the low sugar, low fructose ones, which are your berries, maybe half an apple. Kiwis, outstanding for blood sugar control, maybe 2 plums and a nectarine.
Ramona commented that she was amazed by how quickly YC Cleanse took away her sugar cravings, which leads perfectly into another question we have. How long can we safely take YC Cleanse, and can we do a half dose?
Okay, so YC Cleanse is this product that I helped to formulate. It's a homeopathic yeast and candida formula, and you have to go on to the Unikey site, unikeyhealth.com, read about homeopathy. There's a wonderful paper by Dana Ullman that'll explain homeopathy on there. And what you're going to see is that this particular product takes away cravings because it neutralizes candida and associated fungi and yeast in your system. I live on this, especially during holiday time. So if I know I'm going out and I have to take a dessert, and sometimes you do so because you're with company and you're with relatives and they've made something very special. I take 3 or 4 bites, and then I protect myself before I go to bed at night with a YC Cleanse. Even though the instructions say to do that once a day, I do that twice a day. Can you take half a dose? Absolutely. The more yeasty you are, the more you're going to get some sort of Herxheimer or die-off effect. So I say start easy with a half a dose, and you can go up to a full dose morning and night. You should see results in at least 2 weeks. I'm saying 10 days. I'm thinking 10 days to about 2 weeks. This is one of the best things I've ever used for food cravings. And at this point in time, I don't even take 2 or 3 bites of something because I simply don't have the need to eat any of that. My blood sugar is level and my yeast is now under control. And I had a problem for many, many years because I was a fruitaholic.
Harriet commented that she has bulletproof coffee first thing after her hot lemon water and feels amazing.
Well, I adore bulletproof coffee. And why? Because you're taking a low mold coffee, hopefully an organic coffee, and you're putting in a tablespoon of none other than either a high octane MCT oil, or you're putting in coconut oil, which is very helpful in terms of getting your thyroid revved up. Remember, if you're taking coconut oil, it will rev up to the thyroid by about 50%. And it's also helpful for your blood sugar, and it bypasses bile, so it's absorbed very well. That will keep you going for at least 3 to 4 hours. And if you feel wonderful on that, that's terrific. I also like people to take some protein, and that's where a little bit of your whey protein powder, this is my Unikey vanilla whey that I'm drinking, will also be helpful. Some people do exceedingly well on coffee and a little bit of MCT oil or a little bit of coconut oil. Personally, in the morning, I am so hyped. I don't do coffee, but if you have a sluggish metabolism, it can be an absolute tonic for your system.
Lynn read that berberine is good for blood sugar. Is that true?
Yes. Berberine has been found in clinical studies to be as effective as metformin, which may have some side effects. So the amount of berberine is anywhere from 250 milligrams to 500, and I think that that's very helpful for people that really need some sort of, I would say, some sort of natural substance to really modify their blood sugar. Now, when you talk about blood sugar and the utilization of sugar, you have to realize that there are other nutrients and minerals that are helpful for metabolism of sugar and insulin. The first is zinc. Think zinc. I'm a big believer in zinc because there's not enough zinc in the diet. So I love zinc, 45 to 50, sometimes 100 milligrams of zinc. The other blood sugar mineral, of course, is chromium, anywhere from 200 mcgs to about 1,000 mcgs, according to the studies. The third blood sugar magic bullet is manganese, which means magic in the Greek, interestingly enough. And manganese at the amount of 15 to 30 milligrams per day is very helpful for blood sugar stabilization and is also as helpful as calcium as well as magnesium for your bones, and it prevents seizures. So I'm a big believer in those big three, and they were, let's see, let me try to remember, zinc, chromium, and manganese. Some people do also very well on a little bit of vanadium. You just have to be a little careful with the vanadium and the amounts. So there's a lot you can do to modify your blood sugar. I'm loving what I hear about berberine. There's some really good clinical studies. Many of the functional medicine doctors are using it. I love some of those minerals. They're very good. And also natural spices. And we know about cinnamon, at least a quarter teaspoon throughout the day. Just make sure it's Ceylon cinnamon, not the regular cinnamon, because you don't want any of the coumarin that may be in some of those other types of cinnamon. So your cinnamon should say Ceylon. It should be from a irradiated spice company. There's a lot of great stuff in the health food store these days or on Amazon.
Jennifer says that Alzheimer's runs in her family and is wondering what is the best nutritional advice to reduce risk.
To reduce risk of Alzheimer's, well, here's what I would do if I were you. I would take some coconut oil, because there's some really interesting research about coconut oil and Alzheimer's. I'd make sure I had 1 to 2 tablespoons a day. We talk about coconut oil in Before the Change. I wrote about it in the Fat Flush Plan series, so coconut oil is a must. The other thing I would do for Alzheimer's that I think is very important is make sure that you're not carrying around any heavy metals, anything that is gunking up the system. And that's where monitoring your aluminum and your mercury comes in really handy. In order to do that, you can do a non-invasive test, which is a tissue mineral test. You get it from Unikey Health. We will help you diagnose or identify what's going on and really help you through the 20-page readout that the company will send back to you. So I'm thinking that controlling your heavy metals is important. They find quite a lot of aluminum and sometimes the tangles of those aluminum of the plaques that are in the brain. The mercury is important. Checking on your nickel, which your tissue mineral analysis will do, uranium. And I think that would be exceedingly important for Alzheimer's. You want to get rid of as much sugar as possible, and if you have one of those MTHFR genetic variations, you're going to want to take the right kind of folate, a methylated folate, and a methylated B12. I'm one of those individuals that is homozygous on 1298 in my MTHFR testing. I take quite a bit of methylated B12, and years ago when people were being diagnosed as having dementia or being very forgetful, the first thing doctors would do is give them a B12 shot, and it was amazing. This was in the 60s and the 70s. They seemed to really perk up. So I'm going to say that that B12 could be really essential.
Mary is wondering if YC Cleanse will still help if you eat low glycemic fruit like grapefruit.
Oh, great question. We're back to my YC. If you're eating low glycemic fruit, yeah, why not? You know, sometimes when I go out and have a drink, and I'm a big believer in a little vodka here and there because I like a little vodka with cranberry juice. So I'll take some YC just as a protective mechanism. But yes, a little bit of grapefruit, absolutely. You know, I'm a believer in 2 to 3 helpings of fruit a day. I just don't like to overdo it. I don't believe in a lot of fruit juice, but I love a little bit of fruit. And I would say that's an absolute go, because that half a grapefruit is very helpful to control leptin levels, which have been identified as being an underlying hidden weight gain factor.
How does FatFlush help stabilize our blood sugar issues?
Okay, so FatFlush is my big diet book, and a lot of those principles are woven into the hormonal aspects of Before the Change. So the question is, how does FatFlush
help stabilize our blood sugar issues?
Well, both FatFlush and Before the Change stabilize blood sugar issues because you're having fat at every meal, and fat is the most potent stabilizer of blood sugar, second to protein. So I'm a big believer in fats at every meal, and that's where your coffee in the morning, your bulletproof coffee, comes into play, because you're taking a little bit of coconut oil in that. Your salad dressings that have flaxseed oil in them, or your fish oil, or any other kind of oil that is actually an essential fatty acid type of oil. That's where sometimes even your hemp seed oil comes into play. And having a snack that's also high in protein and high in fat, because those are the 2 blood sugar stabilizers. So that's part and parcel of FatFlush, and it's also part and parcel of Before the Change. The only difference here is that we give you a hormonal twist to the foods, so you're taking the foods, the spices, the herbs, the proteins, and the fruits and vegetables that are also very healthy to keep your hormones steady, particularly your estrogen and your progesterone, which seem to do a seesaw effect all through the change, before the change, and sometimes thereafter.
What are your thoughts on artificial sweeteners?
Okay. Well, artificial sweeteners, I think, are artificial sweeteners, and I'm not a big believer, because a lot of those sugar alcohols, I think, really create blood sugar problems in the long run, and I think that they don't trick the body the way we used to think, and there's some studies to prove that. I also don't think that something like your Splenda or your sucralose is also healthy, because there's a chlorine connection there because of the way that that's made. So what I would suggest, if you do anything, I love the stevia. Most of all, loving New Naturals stevia liquid, or Sweet Leaf stevia. I've written about that. Brand names are in Before the Change. I'm also liking monk fruit, the longevity fruit, which is in Before the Change, as well as Yacon syrup is another one, which is a prebiotic, very helpful. And the other sources of sugar that I think you should look at are the natural sources, you know, what we used to do, which would be your maple sugar or your maple syrup. Very, very good, they think, now for diabetics, believe it or not, and it's lower in fructose, interestingly, than even honey. So when I do any sweetening and I know I want to use something real that's very satiating, I use real maple syrup, and that's not just because I'm from New England. I adore the taste.
Lynn is asking, is Just Like Sugar or Swerve used in ketogenic diets good or bad?
You know, I'm not familiar with those particular sources, Lynn, but I think that the most natural things are the best things. I mean, that's why the stevia comes from a plant, so I like that the best. Zero on the glycemic index. There is also another mixture that I've liked, which is a monk fruit with erythritol, and this particular mixture, under the brand name Lakanto, uses a non-GMO erythritol. That's a kick, because they do that. They're a very conscious company, I'd like to tell you. And I think that can also be helpful. So I'm not familiar with these other 2. We'd have to really Google them and see what's in them. But I think that if you're on a ketogenic diet and you're not eating a lot of sugars in the form of fruits and even vegetables, that if you're going to use something, I would stick to what we know is tried and true and has a lot of research over the years. And that's where your monk fruit comes in handy, and that is where your stevia. So I'm going to stick to those, and that's my story.
Bobby would like to start taking fish oil, but notices that there's so many options. What should she look for?
So what you want in a fish oil is a molecularly distilled fish oil. That's number one. You might look at krill, which is a little smaller animal that they get out of Antarctica, which theoretically is supposed to be purer than most of the fish that we're getting our fish oil from these days. Or you look for something that's made from sardines, the really smallest fish. Sardines and maybe calamari. Calamari oil is big. I'd like you to be taking between 1 to 2 grams per day, unless there is a real diagnosed reason that you need more omega-3s, and you can tell that by taking an omega-3 test, in which case some people go up to 3 or 4 grams per day. I've personally represented a lot of companies, so I'll be full disclosure on that. And in terms of fish oil, I really like what Carlson's has to say. So I would say if you look for anything, look at it for the Carlson brand. Unikey has their own brand called Super EPA, which is also similar to the Carlson's. You want the triple molecularly distilled. You want a company that can also give you the information on whether there's all kinds of contaminants, if they've been taken out, and the mercury levels. So that's the kind of thing that we're looking for in a fish oil. And if you bite into the fish oil and it tastes rancid, then it's not any good. So that's really the gold standard.
Helen would like to know the fastest way to reduce and stop prediabetes.
Fastest way to reduce and stop prediabetes would be to go on before the change or the fat flush plan. That's what you have to do. You've got to really modify the sugars that you're taking to 2 fruits per day. Get on our special teas that really help your whole system. Make sure that you're not taking a lot of sweet things between meals. 2 fruits a day is, I think, one of the keys in that regard. You want the right oils. And you also want to make sure that you're taking a supplement. There's one that I also created, full disclosure, called the weight loss formula that has all of the elements that you might need. It's got the chromium that is very important, and it also has a little bit of berberine in the form of Oregon grapefruit. So that could be very helpful to you. You want to make sure you've got enough zinc, the chromium you get in that weight loss formula, and then of course the manganese, which you can get in a separate supplement. So those would be the keys. And I know that Dr. Atkins, may he rest in peace, would be so happy about the manganese, because he used to devote all of his programs on WOR, when people asked questions about blood sugar regulation, always talked about manganese. So manganese is magic.
Jan would like to know your thoughts about goji berries, acai berries and juice, mangosteen, etc.
These are all superfruits, and I think they probably have their place. I'm just not certain about the quality of some of these foods, in other words, where they're grown, if they have a heavy metal contamination, and I don't know how native they are to the American system, so to speak. So if these are fruits that you know your ancestors would have had for dinner, then go for it, and if not, just stick to what's an ancestral diet. I'm from Eastern Europe originally. The kinds of foods that I eat are the kinds of foods that I remember having at my grandparents' house, and I really stick to that idea. And I also think that when you're in a certain latitude and longitude, it's really healthy to eat what's natively grown in that area.
How is fructose different than glucose metabolism in our body?
So fructose is different than glucose because it's metabolized a little differently. And even though it doesn't have the rapid blood sugar rise and fall, it has a delayed response. What we now know is that fructose is very related to fatty liver syndrome, number 1, elevated LDLs, as I said in the beginning here, number 2, and number 3, high uric acid. So you want to look at everything that you're eating, and if you've got an issue with a fatty liver, high uric acid, and want to really lose weight, then I would suggest you look at your diet carefully to analyze how much fructose you're taking. Typically, people could be taking up to 75 grams per day. You want to get that down by at least half and maybe a little lower. One of the highest fructose fruits, interestingly enough, is none other than apples. So my suggestion, if you have a sensitivity in the fructose arena, and people are now being very sensitive to fructose, all of our tests are showing fructose sensitivity with interesting results, and people that would never have thought it, and I'm one of those people. I reduce my apples to just maybe a half of a green apple a day, and you want to watch your balsamic vinegar, which in the way that it's made in this country can have a high fructose content. content. So interestingly, you just got to look all over. The best sources of fructose come in fruits because they have the vitamins, the minerals, and the fiber. But if there's a sensitivity, you could even react to too many fruits. So you just have to be very careful.
How is sugar related to insulin resistance?
So sugar elevates insulin, and that's really a fat-promoting hormone. So what you want to do is go through your life, go through your diet, and do a sugar detox. You do that by getting on phase 1 of the FatFlush program, picking up a book like Before the Change, which is now available for pre-order. And you take a look at the areas in the book that talk about sugar. For example, in this one that I'm looking at here, we have a whole chapter on controlling carbs. And it's the perimenopausal solution to weight gain, the munchies, and a short attention span. So it will tell you all the ways in which you should eliminate anything in your life that has too much sugar. The way that you metabolize sugar will be discussed, and the way that you can use all kinds of sugar substitutes in healthy snacks to kind of trick the body. My very favorite that I've mentioned to many of my followers before is to really enjoy pickles instead of something sweet. I find that the sour taste can take the place of something sweet, and you'd be surprised how your body recognizes that and is very satisfied within about 7 minutes.
Ramona would like to know, if you're following the FatFlush plan, how long would it typically take to reverse fatty liver disease?
I don't know, Ramona. If you're following the FatFlush plan and you have a fatty liver, there's one thing you have to do. And if you don't have a gallbladder, it's the same thing you need to do. You need to do something where you're taking some sort of supplementation, if you can, because I don't know how you're going to get this in foods, quite frankly, that contains at least 500 milligrams of choline 3 times a day. And all that research is written in my FatFlush plan. We talk about bile and liver in this book as well in terms of fatty liver and Before the Change. So you take a supplement like the Bile Builder, for example, because it has all the nutrients that will help your system be able to detoxify itself and defat a congested liver. So it's 500 milligrams of the choline. It also has ox bile, and if you do not have a gallbladder, you take 2 of these 3 times a day. If you simply have a fatty liver but you have your gallbladder, you just take 1 3 times a day. And you'd also be taking a few little beets, little inositol with that. The other ingredient is taurine, I believe, and there's also some lipase. So take a look at that formula. It's called Bile Builder, and it's on the Unikey site.
Why does having yeast in our bodies make us crave sugar?
Because yeast is fed with sugar. Its primary food is sugar, so it's going to love sugar. It could even be milk sugar. It could love milk. So you've got to be careful with all kinds of sugars. You can see when you make bread and you add a little sugar to the mixture, the yeast rises. So you have to be really careful about that. And even yeasty foods can feed yeast in your body. The candida we're talking about, another associated fungi, because they can cross-react. So that's where this particular supplement comes in handy, works wonders. And also other things that naturally you can do to get rid of sugar or sugar cravings. I told you about the minerals that I love, zinc and chromium and manganese to help metabolize sugar. You can also do that, a 1/4 teaspoon per day of the Ceylon cinnamon, which is quite excellent, and maybe a little oregano oil as well. But if you take something like oregano oil and your silver, you're going to want to know that that can also affect the beneficial microbiome, so you have to take more probiotics. So taking just the right amount, not more than 10 billion CFUs per meal, might just do the trick.
Which food should we eliminate and which should we eat to reduce yeast and sugar cravings?
So to reduce yeast cravings, what should you eliminate? Okay, well, it's all in this book, Before the Change, because I talk about yeast and I talk about sugar, because so many symptoms of perimenopause are really the same symptoms of the inability to metabolize sugar. So what should you eat? Fats, the right fats. We're talking avocados, as I mentioned before, the right kinds of proteins, the right kinds of fruit, 2 fruit a day, low glycemic, low fructose fruit. You'll see the whole list in here. And you also want the wonderful cleansing teas for the liver, and that is where your dandelion root comes in very handy. And so you just want to get rid of extra sugars that you're finding in all the foods, like the yogurt I was talking about. So you've got to check labels. The key here here is that whatever you're taking, whether it's a snack or whether it's breakfast or whether it's lunch or it's dinner, you don't go over 4 grams per serving of sugar. I am looking on the labels of everything these days, and my gosh, there's like 10 grams, 11 grams. Even when you do a smoothie, we want at least 4 grams of sugar. Not more, not less.
We have one more question, so if anyone has any other questions, now is the time to get them in. And it is from Jan. She is wondering how apple cider vinegar plays into all of this.
Apple cider vinegar is a wonder food. That's a real superfood. And apple cider vinegar is good for a lot of things. But one of the things that it does is that it blunts the absorption of carbohydrates. And it also helps in terms of the triggering of natural digestive enzymes. So I'm a believer in at least 2 teaspoons, maybe 3 times a day, and 8 ounces of water. Loving apple cider vinegar. I like the Bragg's apple cider vinegar because I know Patricia Bragg and I know her integrity. So that's the one that I recommend. It's organic and I think it's just about the best on the market.
Kelly says, I've read that even if you cut the bad sugar out and eat a healthy sweetener such as stevia or monk fruit, that your body reacts to the sweetness of these healthier sweeteners the same way it would sugar and can be just as bad for you. Is this possible?
It is possible. So Kelly asked a very good question in reference to even taking these natural sweeteners, and we're talking in this case about monk fruit and we're talking about stevia. In some sensitive people, that can be the case. So the best thing to do if you're super sensitive or hypersensitive is to just use natural fruit as your sweetener. And when you're eating, make sure your blood sugar is level with the right kind of fats and protein so that you're not craving any other kind of sugar and you're not tempted to overeat or indulge. So that's where your fruits twice a day or maybe 3 times a day come in handy, and then you'll have to see it's a very individual situation. That I will tell you.
All right, that was the last question. We did have a question earlier from Tanya about some shipping questions with Unikey, so we will get back to you on that. We'll comment on it. So if anyone else has any questions,
any other questions?
Or otherwise,
hold your peace.
To go for the day, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to say this in terms of questions, and I know we're getting ready for a Labor Day weekend, and so I'm not going to labor this. You should excuse the pun. I think what's important when it comes to licking the sugar habit is that you go through your diet and you clean things up as best you can. If you know you're going to go out to eat and you're going to overindulge in sugar, something like YC Cleanse is helpful because it doesn't start you on a sugar binge. This is what I've lived on for the past 10 years, twice a day. If you've got symptoms of prediabetes, you know about your zinc, your manganese, and now you know about chromium and the weight loss formula, which has several of those elements in there. Berberine is something for you to check out, most definitely. And I think more importantly, I want you to have a wonderful Labor Day, a wonderful Labor Day weekend, and I thank you so much. So we will see you next time.